The 2025 São Paulo Grand Prix was supposed to be a moment of renewal. Ferrari had brought Lewis Hamilton into Maranello to spark a new era, one built on experience, consistency, and championship belief. Interlagos, a circuit that has witnessed historic rebirths before, seemed like the perfect place to turn the narrative. Instead, the weekend turned into one of the most heated controversies of the season, one that now raises an unavoidable question. Are the FIA's sanctions truly neutral, or has Formula One slipped into a quiet era of selective enforcement? The tension began on Friday during sprint qualifying. As Hamilton was completing what looked to be his strongest lap of the session, Charles Leclerc lost the rear of his SF25 in turn 10. The Ferrari spun, the double yellow lights flickered to life, and Hamilton passed the sector just as the signal illuminated. According to Hamilton, the warning appeared too late for him to react safely, without risking a lockup or losing the car entirely. The onboard camera supported the idea that the timing was tight and the visibility of the panel limited at that angle. However, the stewards examined the telemetry and determined that his speed did not drop sufficiently to comply with the required caution. A formal warning was issued. No grid drop, no time penalty, but the tone was set. Even when the circumstances were murky, the burden appeared to fall in one direction. That pattern only sharpened on Sunday. Hamilton started 13th after a difficult qualifying session marked by tyre temperature issues and a lack of balance. The race began chaotically with contact and jostling in the midfield, but the key moment came on the main straight in a duel with Alpine's Franco Colapinto. In the fight for position, Hamilton clipped Colapinto's car, destroying his front wing and damaging the floor of the Ferrari. From that moment on, the SF25 was nearly impossible to drive. The loss of front downforce sent the car sliding on corner entry and washing out mid-apex. The damage was clear, not strategic, not deliberate, simply race contact, with severe consequences for Hamilton alone. Yet, only minutes later, the FIA issued its ruling. Hamilton was deemed fully at fault and handed a 5-second penalty, along with another penalty point added to his super license. This is where the issue deepens. The penalty point system was originally introduced to deter reckless behaviour, repeat offending and dangerous driving. But in this case, Hamilton's 3 current points come from incidents where intent was absent and circumstances were contested. None of these situations involved overtly aggressive moves or safety-endangering decisions. And yet, the score builds just the same, bringing him one step closer to a potential suspension threshold that could alter the shape of the championship. This was not just a rough race. It was the moment when frustration stopped being private. The aftermath of the contact and the penalty was immediate and visible. Hamilton's Ferrari, already compromised, became nearly impossible to control. The car skidded at corner entry, understeered through mid-corner, and snapped without warning on exit. There was no rhythm left to salvage, not even damage limitation. As Hamilton wrestled an unbalanced machine around Interlagos, his race engineer, Ricardo Adami, delivered the news over the radio. The stewards had confirmed the 5-second penalty. That was the moment everything spilled over. Hamilton's response was sharp, almost unfiltered. He called the situation a joke, not out of theatrics, but exhaustion, born from the feeling that he was being judged through a different lens than everyone else. This transmission was heard far beyond the Ferrari garage. The words echoed through the paddock corridors, into media rooms, across social networks, and among teams who have themselves raised quiet concerns about inconsistent officiating. When a 7-time world champion chooses to publicly challenge the integrity of officiating, it is not impulsive, it is deliberate. It is the expression of someone who has seen enough patterns to believe they are no longer coincidences. And Ferrari did not let the comment hang alone. Team principal Frédéric Vasseur spoke after the race, and his tone carried a new weight. Normally composed and diplomatic, he now suggested that recent decisions against Hamilton lacked proportional judgment. He pointed back to Mexico, where Hamilton had received a 10-second penalty for leaving the track and allegedly gaining a lasting advantage, though the footage suggested it was more of an avoidance manoeuvre than an attempt to exploit track limits. That penalty cost Hamilton what could have been his first podium with Ferrari. Vasseur did not accuse the FIA of targeting his driver, but he did state clearly that the criteria used to apply penalties seemed to shift depending on the moment and the individual. Coming from Ferrari's team principal, someone acutely aware of how political Formula One governance is, that statement was significant. What makes this moment even more complex is that Ferrari is not alone in sensing inconsistencies. Multiple teams, off record, have suggested that penalties lack a standardised threshold, that similar incidents can lead to wildly different outcomes. This does not always point to bias. Sometimes it points to a system under strain, adapting to situations faster than the regulations themselves can keep up with. But perception matters, and in Formula One, perception is often as powerful as reality. If drivers believe the rulebook bends differently depending on the driver, the team, or the championship context, trust erodes. And when trust erodes, every decision begins to feel like a political move, even when it is not. The penalty system then becomes something more dangerous than disciplinary structure. It becomes a narrative weapon. Not intentionally, but effectively. This is where the tension now sits, not in a single race, not in a single incident, but in the creeping belief that enforcement is becoming subjective, not consistent. To understand why this moment at Interlagos carries such weight, we need to look beyond the weekend itself. The friction between Hamilton, Ferrari, and the FIA did not begin in Brazil. It has been building since the early phase of the season. The first clear sign surfaced at Zandvoort, where Hamilton was penalised for not slowing sufficiently under double yellow flags. At face value, the penalty seemed standard, but the controversy grew when onboard reviews from other drivers showed comparable situations with no penalties issued. In other words, similar action, different outcomes. That is where frustration begins, not with the existence of rules, but with the feeling that they are selectively emphasised. Then came Mexico. Hamilton went off track during an intense wheel-to-wheel exchange. The steward ruling claimed he gained a lasting advantage, but the video painted a different picture, one of a driver struggling to avoid contact while keeping control. The 10-second penalty was harsh enough to erase what would have been a significant result for Ferrari. And again, the frustration was not solely rooted in the penalty itself, but in the comparison. In that same race, Max Verstappen made a similarly aggressive sequence of moves, but walked away without sanction. When this contrast is seen repeatedly, even coincidence begins to look like pattern. This brings us to the penalty points system, a system originally designed to target repeat offenders or drivers who pose a genuine risk on track. In theory, it is a smart mechanism. In practice, its current application is blunt. Hamilton now has 3 penalty points, 2 from Zandvoort and 1 from the Colapinto collision. None of these incidents were reckless. None demonstrated disregard for safety. They were situational, marginal, and open to interpretation. And yet, the system counts them the same as if they were dangerous driving manoeuvres. This is where the deeper concern emerges. Formula One is not just a competition, it is a finely tuned ecosystem of pressure, consequence, and momentum. A single race ban triggered by cumulative penalty points, even for a driver like Hamilton, could reshape the championship entirely. Every point, every lap, every strategic decision changes when a driver races under the threat of suspension. The psychological weight becomes its own performance factor. Hamilton now races not only against rivals and machinery, but against the invisible clock of the super license ledger. What complicates matters further is Ferrari's political positioning. Ferrari is historically one of the most powerful institutions in Formula One governance. They hold influence, legacy, prestige, and leverage. But in moments like this, even Ferrari appears exposed. The team cannot publicly accuse the FIA of bias without escalating into a full-scale political conflict, something no team wants in a season still very much alive. Yet, remaining silent risks appearing complacent, or worse, powerless. So Ferrari stands in a tight space, defending their driver, challenging decisions, but avoiding direct confrontation. And that balancing act cannot last forever. The deeper issue behind all of this is structural. Formula One does not operate on a fixed interpretation of rules. It operates on human judgment. And human judgment, even with systems and telemetry and regulation documents in place, is influenced by context, pressure, precedent, and perception. There is no algorithm at race control. There are individuals, experienced yes, but subjective nonetheless. And when the stakes rise, those judgments begin to carry visible weight. The stewards change from race to race. The panels are inconsistent. The same incident may be interpreted through different frameworks, depending on who is sitting at the desk and what recent situations they feel compelled to reference. One stewarding team may believe track limits must be enforced strictly. Another may prioritise continuity of racing flow. One may believe that minor contact in a midfield fight is part of racing. Another may feel it threatens safety standards. These differences are not intentional bias, but they do produce inconsistent outcomes. And in a championship where margins are microscopic, inconsistencies become political fuel. This is why Hamilton's frustration resonates. It is not only that he feels unfairly penalised, it is that the mechanisms for judgment appear unstable. If a driver cannot predict what a steward will decide, then he cannot calculate risk reliably. And if a team cannot trust how regulations will be applied, strategy itself becomes compromised. Ferrari knows this, Mercedes knows this, McLaren, Red Bull and Alpine know it as well. Quietly, many acknowledge the same thing. The lack of regulatory consistency is becoming a competitive factor in itself. But what turned Brazil into a flashpoint was the visibility of emotion. Hamilton is not a driver who often allows his internal frustration to spill into public airwaves. When he does, it signifies a breaking point. And when Ferrari, a team famous for protecting institutional image, steps in behind him instead of distancing itself, the situation becomes bigger than a sanction. It becomes a statement. There is also a cultural layer at play. Hamilton's arrival at Ferrari was not just a sporting decision, it was symbolic. Ferrari placed its long-term competitive identity in a driver known for maturity, stability, and experience under pressure. The messaging was clear. Ferrari wanted to rebuild itself as a championship team, but a team cannot rebuild in a championship environment where officiating feels unpredictable. If Ferrari feels the FIA is failing to standardize decision-making, the team must either intervene politically or allow the EC imbalance to continue. That is the crossroads now forming behind closed doors. Do Ferrari escalate the issue formally through the Sporting Advisory Committee, where rule interpretation can be challenged and clarified? Or do they continue to voice concern publicly, hoping public scrutiny forces reform from the outside? Neither path is without risk. Push too hard, and Ferrari appear combative. Stay too quiet, and Hamilton races under a cloud. This is no longer about one weekend. This is about who controls the narrative of fairness in Formula One. This is why the 2025 São Paulo Grand Prix now feels like the beginning of something larger, something that may define how this season is remembered. Formula One has always been shaped by politics as much as speed, from the Senna-Prost disputes over regulations, to the Schumacher-era rulings that shaped championship outcomes, to the Abu Dhabi finale that rewired the sport's governance forever. This is not new terrain, but the stakes are different now. The sport is global, hyper-visible, and monitored in real time by millions. Any perception of inconsistency, favoritism, or selective enforcement spreads instantly. And once that perception takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. For Hamilton, the penalties themselves are not the core issue. He has navigated harder battles. He has overturned races, championships, and eras under pressure. What matters now is the framework he is required to compete under. A driver cannot operate at the highest level while wondering whether the next marginal call will be the one that tips him closer to suspension. No driver should race with the rulebook as a psychological threat instead of a structural guideline. Ferrari, meanwhile, cannot afford to let external forces dictate competitive momentum. This season is too close, the midfield too aggressive, the top teams too evenly matched. Every point matters, every decision matters, and every narrative matters. If Ferrari allows mismanaged officiating to become part of its competitive reality, it risks repeating patterns of past seasons, where performance on track was not enough to overcome forces off it. And the FIA now stands in a delicate position. To dismiss the growing criticism would be to ignore the loudest conversation happening across the sport's fan base, driver camp, team management, and commentary sphere. But to acknowledge inconsistency would be to admit structural vulnerability in race control, something governing bodies are traditionally reluctant to do openly. The real risk for the FIA is not this incident itself. It is the erosion of confidence. Once trust begins to fracture, legitimacy follows. This is why the coming races matter more than usual. Everyone will be watching, not for spectacle or overt conflict, but for consistency. The next yellow flag race situation. The next wheel-to-wheel fight at the edge of track limits. The next collision where blame must be assigned. Every one of these decisions will carry the weight of Brazil. If the FIA applies rules with clarity and consistency, the narrative will stabilize. If the same patterns repeat, the debate escalates into a full season storyline and potentially a political confrontation between teams and officials. The truth is this: Formula One cannot function without shared trust in how races are governed. The drivers must trust that they are judged fairly. The teams must trust that strategy is weighed against competition, not interpretation. And the fans must trust that the outcome reflects performance, not politics. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a warning depends on what happens next. But one thing is undeniable: the championship is no longer just being fought on the track.